Hello and welcome to IBTimes TV. I'm Lianna Brinded, Senior Business Journalist for International Business Times. Joining me now is Guto Bebb. He's the Conservative MP for Aberconwy and is also the founder and leader of the all-party parliamentary group for mis-selling derivatives. Hi, well thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
So you're one of the people at the forefront of campaigning for constituents that have apparently been mis-sold derivatives. But when did it first come to your attention that there was a huge problem that needed to be tackled?
Well, to be honest, I think it first came to my attention that there was a huge problem when I first raised the question in Parliament. I thought it was a very isolated case involving a constituent of mine, but when I actually raised the issue in Parliament, the floodgates opened and we had constituents from all parts of the United Kingdom contacting my office saying that they'd also been sold one of these products. And in no time at all, I'd made contact with the pressure group called Bully Banks, who were actually about 50 business people at that point in time who had been sold one of these derivative products. So it became apparent that this was more than a localised issue, and obviously the more attention we gave the issue in Parliament, the more people started contacting us. So it was all down to that first question in Parliament.
Wow. So, I mean, there's been quite a few milestones when it's come to, I suppose, getting redress, well, hopefully, for a lot of businesses. On the FSA agreement in June last year, would you say that that had given too much power to the banks?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the banks were given a lot of power in that agreement, but it's also fair to note that that reflected the fact that the FSA possibly does not have the necessary resources to do the work themselves. So therefore, whilst I was concerned about the fact that the banks were able to appoint the independent assessors, and obviously the independent assessors had a big impact upon the review scheme, I think that was a reflection of the fact that the FSA did need to move the process forward. And as it happens, we have to admit that of the 173 cases which were subjected to review as part of the pilot project, it was found that in 90% of those cases there had been regulatory failings. So it's fair to argue, I would say, that certainly the independent assessors appointed by the banks did actually do a fairly reasonable job on the pilot review.
Sure. I mean, there were some points in the FSA agreement that has caused concern maybe for the businesses themselves or some of the experts in the field. What would you say were the main concerns coming out of the initial agreement?
Well, from the initial agreement, I think there was obviously a concern about the fact that the banks were appointing the independent assessors, as you've just pointed out. But in the same way, there were concerns about the concept of a sophisticated customer test, which was something that a lot of businesses felt was very unfair. So therefore, you could be deemed to be sophisticated outside the scope of the review if you happen to have a turnover of over a certain limit, or if your asset value were over a certain limit, or if you had too many members of staff. That was a significant concern. And then in the same way, there was a feeling that there was a need for the banks to provide a moratorium whilst that pilot review was ongoing. Because whilst that pilot review was taking place, there were a lot of businesses who were struggling to make the payments on the agreements that they had. And obviously the last thing we wanted to see were businesses failing whilst they were waiting for the outcome of the review. So those were some of the concerns that were raised on the initial FSA review.
Sure. And then moving on to the pilot scheme, like you highlighted, I mean, it was quite shocking that 90% of the cases in that scheme were found to have been mis-sold the product. But at the moment, we're in limbo from hearing about examples of the types of redress. What would you say in the pilot scheme, again, are concerns coming out of that?
Well, some of the concerns from that point onwards is the fact that, yes, we have had a 90% finding in terms of regulatory failings, but then we've got 40,000 businesses who have been sold these products, and the review was only of the first 173. So we would like to see somebody going through the process and come out the other end in order to assess what type of redress they're offered, because the current agreement with the FSA has a lot of failings in my view. We're very concerned about the fact that they've changed again the assessments in terms of what is a sophisticated or an unsophisticated customer, but we're also concerned about the fact that once again we seem to be changing the rules and we seem to be going back to the drawing board because some of the rules have changed, so therefore some of the businesses who've already gone through the pilot are actually having to go through the system again because some of the rules and regulations have changed, and this is all again putting pressure on businesses who want to have relief now.
Exactly, and another main point that which you've picked up on is that there's no deadline. So this seems to have actually caused concern for people who are worried that it's going to damage their legal rights if they wait too long for an outcome. What would you say to those businesses?
Well, I think the message is very clear. Any business who believe that they've been missold one of these products should take action immediately to protect their legal position, because if it's coming up to 6 years since they were sold one of these products, then if they allow that 6-year period to elapse, then they could find themselves in a situation where if they don't get any redress from the FSA scheme, then they will have no legal options left to them. So it's very important that all businesses in this situation do protect their position. But I think it's also important that we try and push the FSA to move things along at a faster pace, whilst also trying to make good some of the concerns that we have about the system. So it sounds very odd. We're saying on one side, we're saying that we do need to make sure that some of the problems with the scheme are addressed, but we also want the FSA to move forward as well. And I know that sounds as if we're at cross purposes, but the confidence of the businesses in the scheme will only become apparent when we see somebody actually going through that process and getting redress at the end of the day. So we do need to ensure that the FSA move forward at a much faster pace.
Sure. With the FSA and the banks, you have been talking to them to get this kind of clarity. Are there any key milestones or talks that you're doing to help constituents?
Well, in terms of the key milestones, I think the first thing obviously was getting the FSA to admit that there was a problem, because initially when we raised the issue they were of the view that there was no issue here whatsoever. So that was a key milestone. Then the other things that we've done is we've persuaded the Inland Revenue, for example, not to pursue businesses who are in difficulties with their tax payments because of the fact that they are facing financial difficulties as a result of being sold some of these products. And our understanding is that Inland Revenue, or HMRC I should say, have been very good with businesses who are facing real difficulties this January. And other milestones is the fact that we are dealing with the banks in terms of ensuring that they are moving to a position where they are giving a moratorium on payments. Now, at the moment, it's up to the banks to agree to give a moratorium. We'd like to change the emphasis so that the businesses are given a moratorium on payments unless the banks can prove that they don't deserve that moratorium. So we've still got work to do there. But there are examples of businesses who have had their payments frozen as a result of the work that we've done as an APPG. And then at the moment, the other current issue is to try and see whether we can have tailored business loans included within the redress scheme. They are currently excluded, and there are literally thousands of businesses out there who have been sold these TBLs, which are very similar to the swaps. And we are also campaigning to try and ensure that they are within the scheme as well. So those are the successes and the current challenges that we're facing as an APPG.
Sure. TBLs is a really hot topic at the moment because in Parliament the other day, Greg Clark confirmed that one person who had a fixed rate loan, which is excluded from the scheme, is actually in it and is being reviewed. Is this seen as a stepping stone towards maybe including more?
Well, it raises questions. There's no doubt about that, because if one customer has been deemed to be, that it's acceptable for them to be within the scheme, then we have to ask the question, why not other businesses who've been sold these TBL products? And when you actually look at those products in detail, they are very, very similar to the swaps. They're underpinned by a derivative, and therefore the penalties facing those businesses because of the way the interest rate situation has changed is very similar to what happened to businesses sold a swap. So as a result, I think it is important that we do campaign on the TBL issue, because what we want is a level playing field. We understand that the owners of Yorkshire Bank and Clydesdale Bank are willing for their customers to be included on a voluntary basis, but I think ultimately the FSA should take a grip on this issue and decide whether we are going to have a uniform scheme for all businesses sold these products, or whether there's going to be a piecemeal agreement between individual banks. And I obviously know that the best way forward, in my view, would to have a uniform view across the board.
Absolutely. And I suppose, how would you, in a nutshell, describe the whole mis-selling derivative scandal? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but people have come back with one sentence how it's eaten away at UK businesses. What would you say in a nutshell?
I think it's an example of the banks forgetting the fact that they were there to serve customers and actually seeing their business customers as an opportunity to make money. And I think the truth of the matter is we have seen a real impact on 40,000 plus businesses in the United Kingdom who trusted their banks, and that trust appears to have been misplaced.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us. That was Guto Bebb, Conservative MP for Aberconwy and founder and leader of the all-party parliamentary group for mis-selling derivatives.